quieran comentar acerca de su presentación o de lo que...
Muchas gracias, Marisol, y muchas gracias por la presentación muy bella y también por todos que vinieron hoy por aquí. Bien, como oyeron, yo soy de Brasil, yo estudié un poco de español, pero no hablo tan fluentemente, mi español ya hace mucho tiempo que no practico, estoy recuperando un poco mientras aquí, pero no es tan fluente. Por lo tanto, la presentación va a ser en inglés, perdón por eso, pero creo que la mayoría de los contenidos sea solamente más de imágenes do que otras cosas. Y después puedo contestarlos en inglés o español, puedo intentar lo que prefieren. Well, changing languages now, which is my easier one to communicate in science. So, well, I'm going to talk a little bit about what I've been doing the last few years, especially through the last stages of my PhD research and what I'm currently doing in the MCC in Harvard with my supervisor, Stephen Pierce. And as Marisol mentioned, I work on squamates, lepidosaurs in general, so lizards, snakes, and the tuatara from New Zealand, this little guy over here, which currently represent over 10,000 species. So those species, they occupy a big diversity of environments, and they have many different body plans, such as the famous limbless body plans of snakes, but also amphisbaenians and other lizards that independently lost their limbs several different times independently. And I was given this project by my supervisor in Canada, Mike Caldwell, to understand the early evolution of lizards and snakes within the context of all other reptiles, including all of the data currently available. So, not a small project. And besides that, I had to do with the fact that the oldest known fossil squamates that we have available were like this, which is not much, especially if you want to run phylogenies. That's not much data to deal with. Also, where those lepidosaurs fit in the entire reptile tree of life? Well, most of the data set, actually every single phylogenetic data set until very recently, they include all of this enormous diversity of squamates and lepidosaurs in general as a single terminal unit in all of those data sets from 88 until 2016. So obviously we're not really testing relationships very well, especially because we didn't know really well which were the earliest squamates to evolve to represent insect phylogenies. Part of that problem of which are the first ones to evolve comes from the fact that morphological and molecular hypotheses of squamate evolution were very contradictory. Every single morphological data set always indicated that iguanians were the first crown group of squamates to evolve. However, all molecular hypotheses always indicated that iguanians were deeply nested within the lizard tree of life, with two other lineages, geckos, and a limbless squamate clade called Didemids would be the earliest evolving early group of squamates. So, very contradictory hypothesis. And so, also iguanians would be nested with anguimorphs, such as the Komodo dragon and snakes, in this large clade called Toxicophora, a group that pretty much we never cover with morphology. In order to try to better deal with this big mess, I started with the good old taxonomy, studying important new specimens, publishing new species, and describing some other ones, such as these, which turned out to be the oldest known geckos in the world from Solvolcan in Germany from the late Jurassic. Two species from Brazil, Guaragana sul-americana and Calangoban. This one, unfortunately, destroyed by the fire in the National Museum of Brazil that I'm sure you have heard of. So that species actually officially would no longer exist, as we lost the holotype and only a local specimen. And also publicly found on the from North America. Of special emphasis, I would call these, which Guaragama, which represent a stemacrodonton. If you don't know what an acrodonton is, it's pretty much chameleons and agamids, which today live only in the old world, so Africa, Asia, Europe, And this was the first record either of a living or extant species of this group in South America. And not only that, but it was also one of the oldest members of this lineage and the most basal member of this lineage. So it really shifted what we thought about the early evolution of this group and of early iguanid evolution in South America. Besides that, I tried to bring a little bit on functional morphology and how we can utilize biomechanics and functional morphology to understand patterns of evolution in lepidosaurs. One study that we also did was, for instance, this one in which we tried to understand the mechanics of biting in lizards. So to reach that goal, what we did was we got an iguana skull, we dissected, we mapped, we CT scanned, so we could have high detailed information of the skull morphology, and we mapped every single skull of the adductor system of the skull in that digital model, which we could replicate the insertion patterns of all of those muscles and apply the load values to all of those muscles, and eventually see how much stress during hard biting they would cause on the skull, and how that stress changes among different skull models in lepidosaurs. So for instance, we tested those 4 different models. The 2 ones on top are the most common patterns among extant squamates, just different in the kind of ligament they have in the temporal region. This is the most plesiomorphic condition with the ligament between the juga and the quadrate, and this is the condition we see usually in herbivores, in which the ligament connects to the lower jaw. Then we tested also those 2 other models in which we have a lower temporal bar, which no extant squamate has, but 2 fossil species have. And they are a little bit different because they, in one case, from a fossil lizard from China, this lower temporal bar is fused to the quadrate, similar to the modern Tuataris phenodon. And in the other one, it's only sutured, not fused, so this should cause different patterns. And what we see is that the most common pattern, it causes a lot of stress around the temporal region during biting, in this study using finite element analysis. But when we actually change the orientation of the ligament, as observed in herbivores, you highly reduce stress in the palatal region. So we actually could provide some support to the theory that herbivores actually have better adapted skulls towards hard biting. Herbivores, usually because of the constant biting on plant material, they have way more stress on the skull compared to carnivores, for instance. When we add the lower temporal bar to this model, what we observe is actually increasing stress in the bar, but a huge reduction of stress around the pterygoid and other bones of the palatal region. So this seems to be causing a similar reduction of overall stress to the skull as this one here does. And this one was inferred to be a herbivore as well. So this is an independent strategy towards reducing stress. And this last one actually didn't provide any advantage, and we think this could be just a functional release, but not an adaptive kind. So our conclusion was that the lower temporal bar may actually redevelop in squamates in the fossil record to reduce overall stress in a similar mode to this ligament we see, but only under some restricted conditions. It does not seem to be really adaptive in this case. But the core of my project would be phylogeny. How to improve the phylogenetic question. So for that, we started from the beginning, how to build data sets. There has been a lot of effort into how to analyze data sets, but not how to build them. And one of the main things that we saw is, well, usually when we're reading this character data matrix, it's so hard to understand the character. What does that mean? Or it seems to be redundant with another character. And actually, if we break down the characters to understand and check the logical dependencies or biological dependencies among them in morphological data sets, we could find a lot of problems. For instance, characters which divide transformation series into more than one. So in this example, supratemporal bone shortening as absent and present, and supratemporal bone lengthening absent and present. Well, if the supratemporal is shortening condition is present, obviously the lengthening must be absent. It may sound a bit ridiculous, but it is present in many morphological data sets. The second one would be character dependent, such as nasal longer than frontal. Well, is it the nasal that gets longer or the frontal that gets shorter? Just by this, you can't tell. So it makes for totally two independent things as a same final pattern. So upon reading over 1,000 different characters present in Swami datasets, what we could detect were 19 different categories of problematic character constructions, upon which several characters could be found within each one. In total, they would amalgamate between 30 and 45% of all morphological characters in Swami's. So obviously there was a need for revision, and that's what I decided to take for the new dataset that I decided to construct. So to build this dataset, besides character revisions, I visited several museum collections, including here. So Mexico City is this one here. It was my very first trip during my PhD, and it's also the very first one during my postdoc, so it's a good start. And I needed to collect a lot of data from those museum collections. I spent half the year traveling some years, so it was really time-consuming, very tiring. But I did manage to collect a lot of useful information by first-hand observations of the specimens, so not relying only in the literature. And in the end, I built these new morphological data sets of 247 morphological characters, about 129 taxa. I actually have more taxa, which I'm adding over time by analyzing the data, which is the largest available data set for all diapsid reptiles. So those are the major lineages of reptiles. The first one with a deep sampling of lizards and snakes. And I also sampled 4 molecular data, which is important to help understand the convergent patterns of morphological evolution in swans. And another approach that I took was using the traditional parsimony method, but also exploring the probabilistic approaches available, for instance, in different sources such as Mr. Bayes or East. And the main reason, just to give a little bit of background, those methods were highly restricted until the 90s because of computational limitations. But then they started to increase a lot in popularity in molecular systematics as we had better computers. And especially in the late 90s, we developed the first Bayesian approach towards analyzing molecular data. And most importantly, in 2001, the first model of morphological evolution to be able to analyze morphological data under maximum likelihood and Bayesian inference. And why try those ones? Well, one of the reasons that they have statistical consistency. So as we tend to sample data towards infinity, they tend to converge towards the true answer. They are explicit model-based approaches, so you know exactly what you're doing, you're parameterizing everything, so you know exactly why things are behaving that way. They also take many parameters which are really important into consideration, such as branch lengths, substitution rates among the different characters, variation of those rates, and also variation of those rates among different lineages if you're using what we call clock. And just to give a quick example, such as this one parameter here, the substitution rate across characters. The way that those methods work, if you're not familiar with them for Bayesian inference, is that you usually have these prior distributions of how that parameter should behave. And the software will try very different shapes of this distribution, which is governed by the mean of the function, the alpha in the case of a Gaussian distribution. So many different shapes will be tried, and different values will be sampled from this distribution. And by co-estimating these parameters with all the other parameters we have in the analysis, it comes up with the optimal combination of these parameters. After that, it brings in the data that we have, the morphological data or molecular data, and given that information from the data, it will update all of those probabilities and give out what we call the posterior probabilities and what is the overall optimal values for your parameters, including the tree topology, the species relationships. They're really powerful, and even though we have a very simplistic model for morphological data compared to molecular data, some recent studies have tried to assess how accurate those methods are compared to maximum parsimony, for instance. And this study showed that, for instance, the distance between what we call rocks and float distance, but the distance between the trees we're getting compared to the true trees which were simulated, they are lower than in the MK model, which is the one for maximum likelihood and Bayesian inference, compared to parsimony. But this distance tends to decrease as you sample more characters. So if you have a lot of characters, the results are pretty much similar, but if you have few characters as common for morphological data, those methods seem to be superior. As a result, there's been a lot of fight between the statistics crowd, the maximum parsimony, and the likelihood crowd, especially rampaging over Joseph Felsenstein, the guy who created all the algorithms for maximum likelihood and also eventually were influential for Bayesian inference. But if you continue to see the most recent studies on that, even studies that simulate data in a different way, in a way that should, in theory, benefit parsimony, it still gets Bayesian inference as actually having shorter distances towards the true trees, but this difference decreases with more characters. So the results are pretty much the same. So, okay, so we have different ways of analyzing data available, a lot of data collected, and a new data matrix based on different criteria. So what can we do with that? So I analyzed all of this, and this is a tree, part of the first half of the tree, where we have all the early major lineages of reptiles. So we have early catarrhinids, then we have marine reptiles, ichthyosaurs, thalassosaurs, circuiregions, weird things that we call protosaurs, turtles, and so on. Archosauriforms, so the things that lead up to crocodiles and dinosaurs. But know that this is maximum parsimony under morphology. So this is by far the most common method by which we have always analyzed morphological data. And if we go down here to the squamate component of the tree, oh, by the way, these are in red taxa that have always been thought to be the sister group to lipidosaurs. You can see that most are everywhere in the tree, but with lipidosaurs, so they pretty much are other things, not lipidosaurs. And within the squamate tree, we see that geckos are the earliest crown group of squamates. These are fossils here. And one is our deep nest in the tree, sister to angromorphs, so Komodo dragons and snakes. In a clade composition very similar to the molecular toxicopher. So what we're seeing here is morphology data getting the same result as molecular data. So this is the very first time that we have morphological signal agreeing with the molecular signal in the lizard tree of life. Moving onwards, I also applied those probabilistic methods, Bayesian inference, using deep dating, which allows us to have what we call clock trees. So they allow us to co-estimate divergence times, rates of evolution, and so on. And what we get is divergence times for early clades of diapsid reptiles before the Permian Triassic. The Triassic was a period where we actually see this radiation of different clades. So we have many different species of reptiles shown up in the fossil record, but this is a radiation period, not really origin of the clades, including squamates. Importantly, we also had new data from CT scans of this enigmatic lizard from the northern Italian Alps. Nobody really knew what this thing was, just that it was likely a lepidosaur, but nobody really understood it quite well. And upon studying this specimen personally, and also with new data that we obtained by CT scanning and segmenting the skull, we could insert it in the phylogeny, and we found that it occupies the most basal position in the squamates. In other words, it's the oldest lizard on Earth. And this is 75 million years older than the previous oldest record of a fossil lizard. So partially bridging a huge fossil gap that we had between the oldest known fossil lizards and what we always thought was the time of origin of those lepidosaurs. So this was published in Nature last year, and really helped us to start promoting the idea that lizards have a very deep and ancient history, older than dinosaurs or mammals. So that's cool, and that's something that we can allow us to have way more information about phylogenetic patterns. But what about the macroevolutionary patterns? What about beyond divergence times evolution rate, for instance? You recall that I mentioned that the Triassic seems to be a period of adaptive radiation, but how to test that? So this is what I'm trying to currently do. And so adaptive radiations, it's a theory that was first proposed by Osborn a long time ago, over 100 years ago, but it was highly promoted by George Gaylor Simpson in his book, The Major Features of Evolution, in 1953. And he defended in that book that especially the origin of major plates like mammals would happen during the aftermath of mass extinction. So there will be empty adaptive zones upon which those new lineages could explore, empty zones left by the taxa that went extinct, and they would be occupied by opportunistic taxa, so mammals in the case of the Cretaceous Paleogene mass extinction. So Simpson used this theory to explain the origin of major plates and how those early plates should have high evolution rates. This theory really became popular among ecologists who have been exploring how the new resources or innovations might explain major extant radiations like cichlid fishes in Africa or Darwin finches in Galapagos. But really the focus of the theory in its origin was the fossil record and major lineages. And one of the key concepts about it is, in its strict sense, adaptive radiations mean high rates of evolution at the origin of plates, high increase in morphological disparity, and soon after that, followed by increase in taxonomic diversity. So everything increases, and then over time, as you increase the number of species, morphological disparity and number of species would keep high, but the rates of evolution would decrease as you stabilize these new ecosystems. And this phenomenon would be responsible for the origin of most of taxonomic and morphological diversity in history of life. But those things have rarely been actually tested using the fossil record over large periods of time and with large data sets, or even including morphological but also molecular data and their rates of evolution. So what I did, importantly, recently a few studies have tried to do this, and they have used new data to test these hypotheses for some major lineages, such as like owl metazones during the Cambrian explosion. What they find is that there seems to be, in a lot of situations, a huge gap between the actual origin of clades, in the initial disparity in shape, and the actual increase in taxonomic diversity. So during the Cambrian explosion, for instance, we see the origin of clades and a lot of morphological disparity, but the actual increasing number of species happens several million years later, almost 100 million years later or so. And the same thing with foraminiferous after Cretaceous Paleogene extinction. And they named this theory, this new model called a constructive radiation. So we have initial disparity, but the disparity is slowly built over time, as well as the number of species. So I got my data set. I expanded it, especially by setting more extant taxa, for which I can get both morphological and molecular data. And I had those questions in mind. Can we actually identify periods of adaptive radiation in the history of reptiles? What are the periods of major phenotypic innovation that we see here? And finally, to what extent mass extinctions may affect system diversity? I utilized those probabilistic methods, but also applying new softwares and trying to understand, for instance, some other parameters such as diversity sampling and this deep root attraction phenomenon. Just to make a long story short, this essentially is a mechanism. If you've ever heard that molecular phylogenies and divergence time estimates sometimes may overestimate the age of origin of groups, well, this is one of the big reasons, and it's sometimes caused by conflict between morphological and molecular data. So it tends to stretch oldest nodes on the tree. There are ways to correct for that, which I'll show. And importantly, those methods allow you to co-estimate tree topology, divergence and evolution rates, so we can have evolution rates which are the best explanation given the tree topology. So they are not estimated subsequently to the tree, but everything is estimated. The traditional way of analyzing this with uniform prior distributions for instance, extinction rates and other parameters on this initial way of building up your tree, this is what you get. So this is a very similar tree in terms of divergence times, and the error bars here in purple for the tree that I mentioned that we have published. And what we see is a lot of early adaptive lineages diverging during the Permian here. But also lots of the deepest branches being stretched back prior to the Permian, way older than Permian, actually extending even to the Devonian. But the Devonian is the time when you actually see the first amphibians coming to land by the fossil wreck, so that's a little bit too far back. But if you actually correct, for instance, the parameters on extinction rates, we avoid that entirely. And we actually have most of the lineages in the Permian, the oldest ones in the Carboniferous, only a few million years older than the oldest known reptile. So this makes way more sense. So we decided to use this correction and also here implement that also in the beast analysis. As in the previous one from Mr. Bays, we get a lot of clades much before the Permian, and when we try to correct for that with more informative prior distributions, not much actually changed. So this does not seem to be correctable for that, but Mr. Bays is, so we use data from Mr. Bays here. And that's actually a big problem since most of the clock studies using morphological data, they utilize beast only. So comparing morphological molecular rates, we can see that there is absolutely no correlation whatsoever. They're totally independent. There are high rates and low rates for both, but clades with high rates of morphological evolution don't necessarily have high rates of molecular evolution, and vice versa. And plotting those rates across time, so during the 300 million years that we have of reptile evolution, we can see here, especially during the Permian, a huge increase in the rates of morphological evolution associated with the rate increase in the number in the origin of new diapsid reptile lineages. They are way above 1, which is the model value that we have for most lineages, and especially we see these increasing rates decreasing and subsequent increase again. So this drop in rates is also coincident with a drop in morphological disparity during the Guadalupian. And only recently we actually identified that the Guadalupian was a period of mass extinction as well. Prior to the Permian mass extinction, this seems to be actually affecting reptiles as well, which was never really recognized before. After the Permian mass extinction, we see a drop in disparity as expected, although not as much as during the Guadalupian. And we see quickly after that a spike in morphological disparity, even above pre-extinction levels, also associated with an increase in morphological rates, with some of the highest rates during early diapsid evolution. So we see high increasing rates, increasing morphological disparity, and also a huge increase in the number of fossil species of reptiles during this period. We have very little species from the Permian, but we have a lot from the Middle Permian onwards, including the oldest representatives of several clades. So everything matches up to an adaptive radiation here, as Simpson proposed, and lots of people have previously hypothesized for the Permian-Triassic extinction. But after that, if we go to the Jurassic and Cretaceous, so this data is mostly on the Lepidosaurs, the data that I have here, and we see some of the oldest branches in Lepidosaur evolution having also high rates, but they quickly decrease and continue kind of close to model values all the way up to the end of the Cretaceous. And disparity is not exactly high, but it's steadily and continuously built up, especially by the end of the Cretaceous. Also, we have almost no lineages of reptiles, of squamates and other Lepidosaurs during the Jurassic, both of raw number of species from the fossil record and also corrected by different sampling biases. So what we know is that the diversity of species of squamates increased slowly towards the end of the Cretaceous, and also seems here to be the case with disparity. All of these builds up to the so-called constructive radiation model. So we can't explain broad patterns of Lepidosaur evolution based only on an adaptive radiation model, and actually it seems to be a constructive radiation, as also recovered previously for the origin of all. Subsequently to this, during the Cenozoic, we see a drop in disparity following the mass extinction here, and it quickly increases by the Paleogene and later to the present time when you have the highest disparity ever measured, which is Also, the present time is also the period of highest number of species of squamates. We have more than 10,000 species. Nothing close to, nothing in the fossil record is even close to what we have today. So today we seem to be seeing the peak in terms of diversity and disparity in lepidosaur evolution. But morphological rates do not seem to be exactly very high at this period. Some high rates of molecular evolution here, but not very high overall. So it's difficult to see this. This may be another period of constructive radiation as things may be built up over time over here. But we actually need more data for the Cenozoic to actually assess this in a more meaningful way. Plotting those rates across the tree that we got, we can observe here for the morphological rates of evolution. As indicated before, high rates are in red, so a lot of high rates over here at the origin of all of those major lineages of reptiles. And the later lineages, especially later lepidosaurs, with smaller rates of evolution. And one of the key things here is that we can see, for instance, turtles, they have at their origin rates which are about 4 times faster than the modal values, or the median values that we had before. And so early sauropterygians, so some of those marine reptiles such as placodons, have rates 16 times faster. So we see the origin of major new body plants with very high rates of evolution. But curiously, they both have similar morphotypes, a protective morphotype with a carapace on top. For a long time, people actually thought they were sister lineages. So we see that we have heterogenic rates of evolution at the origin of two similar functional morphotypes, which is something that nobody really noticed before. And even more crazy than this is what we see in the serpentiform morphotypes, so the snake-like body plants, such as in snakes, and Amphisbaenians. Amphisbaenians, they originate at rates which are 5 times faster, but rates are 34 times faster than median values for all reptiles. And actually, rates have the highest rates of evolution among all the reptiles that we could test, by far the highest rates, indicating that snakes are not only weird, but they became weird fast. And this is even more impressive. So this is the morphospace that we built from our data, and we can see snakes in red and Amphisbaenians in orange. They have very similar placements in the morphospace, so they reach this regional morphospace at very different rates. So it seems that we have adaptive radiation marking the recovery from the Permian-Triassic extinction, like lots of people have proposed before, and marking the origin of reptiles. The radiation of major lineages of reptiles, although the origin is back into the Permian. Constructive radiation patterns seem to be a better explanation for the origin of the major lineages of lepidosaurs and their radiation in the Mesozoic, but not really adaptive radiation. And we see similar morphological novelties, and new body plants are arriving at very different speeds during evolution of reptiles, and finally, the highest rates of evolution that we could find on the evolution of snakes. And so we are moving forward with this and eventually collecting also quantitative data from morphometrics to see if this pattern is also explained by morphometric data and to be able to compare the two of them and see if we have a lot of people who have had the patience to host me during the last years when I was collecting data. Marisol is over here. And Maria Pereira. And also, gracias de nuevo para Marisol para invitarme aquí hoy y la UNAM. And finally, the people who gave me my postdoc fellowship and the people from my PhD, that kind of stuff. I also have Twitter. Anybody cares about that? And that's it. Thank you very much.